Hey there, it's Mrina. In this video, we're going to take a look at the Tiny MCE's Customer Relationship Management Starter Config, which is built specifically for anyone who wants to add rich text editing to their CRM. So we've put together all of the layout and config options that you need to tailor Tiny MCE for your CRM. Now, whether you're building a new CRM tool or upgrading your existing toolkit, the starter config is great if you just want to do full-blown rich text editing within your CRM or just update some of the fields on your CRM to have rich text editing capabilities. Before we dive into the specifics, let me just highlight where you can find all of the starter configs. So if you head over to tiny.cloud and you head over to solutions, and you will immediately see all of the many pre-made starter configs that we've made for different use cases and very popular use cases. Of course, for rich text editing, there's infinite use cases, but these are some of the popular ones over here. To find the CRM one, just click on Customer Relationship Management, and voila, we're here. So let's take a look at it. If you've probably seen CRMs, you've seen that many CRMs have the ability to send messages to people, whether they're customers or prospects, and that's what we've sort of modeled the starter config after. Now, if you want to add rich text editing to a simple text field, you can always take this starter config and pare it down to what you want to do. We know that many CRMs are cluttered with a lot of different data fields, different input types, and different panes and different views about one particular record. So that's why we really pared down the starter config to give that very minimalistic kind of look. And to kind of really see the difference, what I'd like to do is actually show you a comparison about how TinyMCE's starter config for general developers looks like and what the starter config for CRM specifically look like. So on tiny.cloud on the main website, you will see that this is how TinyMCE sets up their text editor. You have a toolbar up top. These settings are all viewable, insert images, and then you have a status bar in the bottom. Just a lot of information because typically, our main developers are trying to plug this in maybe to their blog site or things like that. But it's not a CRM specific use case. Now, if you go back to the CRM example, you will notice, first thing, that the toolbar is actually in the bottom. And we did this because we want your users to be able to just get right into the editing experience as if they're sending an email. And then when they are ready to see other text controls that they need, they're right there at the bottom. This is very common in many CRMs. You will also notice that if you're familiar with TinyMCE, there's usually a menu bar, and I pointed out a status bar at the bottom. We've removed both of them as well, making it a little bit more minimalistic and clean. You also see all of the basic functionalities that you kind of expect as part of an email: undo, redo, spell check, text formatting, a few extras like adding links, adding emojis, images, adding templates. We'll go over that a little bit. And the code editor, which all seem very basic at first, but really enhance your user's experience. Now, not all relationships and customers are built equal. So if your users want to do some advanced formatting on the text, well, you can already see that there is some advanced formatting, but they can do that very quickly right here. And the reason this is not kind of part of the main thing is because only when they need the advanced controls we provide it to them. Other than that, we're still keeping the editor nice and minimal so that they can quickly get to what is most important, which is typing out that email. Now, one other thing that we wanted to add to the starter config that is a little unique, I want to point out, is auto resize. Now, if you notice, I'm hitting enter, it automatically resizes the text box. And the editor kind of grows and shrinks based on how much the content grows and shrinks. Of course, there's also a scroll bar that will enable you to scroll through your content. Something else that's kind of interesting is we'll get into how max length of this will matter. But for now, I think it's a very cool feature that you can grow and shrink without having to worry about whether you're going to be able to read all the content at once and consume it. Now, something else that's probably on your mind if you're a developer or someone who's just building a CRM is keeping your database under control. A lot of messages, a lot of records are going to be kept in track, and you don't want to introduce additional bloat or extra formatting or extra HTML into the database, because that really just leads into what indexing issues, makes the database grow unnecessarily large, and it really can also end up costing a lot if your database is on the cloud. And that's why I'd like to point out the power paste feature on the starter config. It basically lets your users copy content from other apps like Google Docs or Excel, and it copies over the formatting without breaking underlying HTML code. So if you're a developer, you kind of know all of the extra code that gets copied over when you copy from these programs, especially like Google Docs or Word. The extra span tags that go between paragraphs. And PowerPaste basically strips it out, so you're only storing the code you need to format the text. If you don't believe me, let's take a look. So basically, I've got a sample Google Docs document with some pretty advanced formatting. It even has an image in there. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just Control A, select everything, and go over here and paste. And now very quickly you can see that most of my, if not all of my formatting has been preserved into this email template, and my images are there, my emojis are there. It's looking great, right? I could have typed up my template in a Google Docs, quickly pasted it over without losing the crucial parts. Best part is, if you're a developer, you're thinking this is like 100 lines of code. It's not. Open up the code editor. It's only 18 lines of code. It's basically stripped away all of your span tags and only stored what's very crucial and important to you. And this really helps keep your database size nice and small, and it keeps the HTML honestly very easy to understand. So while we're at this feature I just showed you, it's called part of the advanced code editor, and it also lets some of your power users, if they're composing a more advanced message just with like images and content, you can let them do that. But sometimes you don't want that. You want to have more stricter controls on what your users can do with text, and we do enable you to disable this feature. So if you're sending a fairly plain text email to customers and prospects, and you want to make sure that you're not giving them too many crazy options, so that it looks good and renders properly in the inbox that they're sending it to, you can totally just make sure power paste is at false, and it will paste as a normal text. Now, let's take a look at this menu I showed before. You might have noticed that the font sizes are in pixels, which is what you want to be doing for emails. You can also specify font sizes in different units as well, but we highly recommend pixels because it's compatible. Now we've also got some basic styles here, as well as like font selector with basic formatting. Now one thing that is not in the start config, and I mentioned this earlier, is the CRM application is setting that maximum length on the editor content. That might be useful for a smaller field. Now, for example, if you have a description that you don't want to go over a character limit, then you might want to set that maximum length. But in this case, it auto resizes, it gives you the ability to scale it a little bigger if the text is a little bigger, and so on and so forth. So I think that's pretty cool. And the last big thing that I do want to point out when thinking about a CRM is personalization. You should be able to personalize this experience for each user, because as we discussed, not all customers are the same. And so let's take a look at templates. Templates is what we've got here is like a predefined template that you can specify in your config, and I'll go over the options on where you can specify them and alternate them. But if you have like a salesperson and they're using this for reaching out to their customers, you can do this without having for them to build out their own email template. So here's one example of what an outbound email could look like, and an example of what a follow-up email could look like after an initial meeting. Of course, there is also merge tags that I kind of mentioned earlier, and I was talking about, that are non-editable tags that you can basically insert into the email to personalize it as well. And then your CRM would basically take these merge tags and replace them with record details. Of course, merge text can be used in other apps within a CRM, like custom landing pages or quotes, whatever the kind of rich text content you're building for people. Um, but these merge tags can be amazing and a huge time saver at the end of the day. So that's sort of a quick walkthrough of the CRM starter config. As I mentioned, you can take this and customize it for whatever you want to do within your CRM, even if it's not email or messaging. The same principles still apply. It's a minimalist layout enforcing strict formatting and extreme personalization. Now, if you're watching this video, you're probably a developer. So let's take a quick look at the code behind the starter config. So when you get the starter config, before I go into my code editor, you will see this option. And you will see that you can get the code in two versions, one without the code tips and one with the code tips. The code tips are really helpful if you're learning about how to use TinyMCE and you want to understand what exactly each configuration option does, right? And let's take a look at that version very quickly with the code tips. And you can see that there are detailed comments on every single configuration and documentation links where you can find out exactly what that configuration does. This is great, but because I'm a little familiar at this point with this configuration, I'm going to copy the one without code tips, paste it into my editor over here, and want to get started. Now, one thing that I'm going to quickly do is run my HTTP server. The way I've set up this project is very simple. I downloaded the TinyMCE SDK. If you're not familiar, I'd highly recommend going to the Getting Started guide. Download the SDK. It's a very simple JS file that you download, and then start an index.html where you can paste this starter config just to get started. There are also millions of documentations on how to basically load it with your React app, your Vue app, and so on and so forth. But for this case, let's keep it simple. And yeah, let's take a look at how this works. So here you can see that once I've started running this, I'm actually going to switch over and show you that if I load localhost 8080, it indeed loads my text editor, which is very similar, if not the same, as the text editor we saw over here on the website. So I have it running locally by just copy pasting my starter config. The one thing that you will notice very quickly that I did not want to show you was over here, when you start the script, there is a no API key. I pasted my API key, but for privacy purposes, I did not want to show you my account and login. You can do that very simply by logging into your tiny.cloud account and getting an API key custom for you. Well, if that was simple enough, let's get started. So first off, what we do is we initialize our TinyMCE in our script, and then we define tokens that we want to apply, like our API token. And then we want to specify what HTML selector to apply. In this case, an element with the ID of editor, so that's what the selector is. Very straightforward if you are a developer and have been here before. And here's where you'll start to see some more of the customization of this specific tool, of this specific text editor. You will notice that we have various plugin options like add code, autocorrect, auto resize, the power paste option that I was discussing earlier. We also have some of the min height and max height that I talked about earlier, as well as the bottom margin and how much spacing you want from that bottom margin. Then you can specify what type of toolbar you want, undo, redo, spell checker. For example, if I want my paste option to be here before my spell checker, I do that. I reload. Let's see. Reload. I noticed I reloaded my app and I'll quickly see that my paste is right before my spell checker. So this is pretty straightforward, very cool. You might ask, now how do I actually personalize this? And, how can I go beyond the booleans of true, false, and what's already exists? Now we discussed the auto formatting option for Power Paste. But what if your users don't want to do that, right? We don't want to assume that users automatically want the Power Paste option, especially if they're just doing very simple emails. So a quick look at TinyMCE's Power Paste Google Docs import. It actually lets you create a new promise that would resolve based on if your user actually confirms if they want to um, copy over the formatting or not. So if we actually just copy over this code over here into our Power Paste Google Docs. So currently it's just set to any code that's copied over, clean it up. But what we can actually do, and what I think will be very interesting, first to do some live coding over here. Add a comma there. And what this is going to do is when I copy over from Google Docs, you will see a pop-up. So I'm going to paste my, actually I should probably reload my app. Just that very quickly. But you will see a pop-up that actually asks the user if they want to remove the formatting from the Google Doc that they're copying over, or do they want to keep the formatting, right? And this really gives more power to your users and really more control to the end users on what they want to do and how much storage do you have. So here we're going to assume we want to keep the formatting. You'll notice that most of the formatting indeed is kept on this thing, and all of this is running locally. So that's about it. If you copy that starter config into your app or into a blank page, you can really just take it, customize it, and use it for what you need to get started with TinyMCE CRM almost immediately. Hopefully this gives you enough of a starting point to get started with rich text editing and within your CRM, and have tons, and of course there's tons of more resources for you to check out. Please head over to some of the blogs on our main page. There's also amazing documentation. As I said, I was quickly able to copy paste an example of what a prompt could look like on this page. So it works right out of the box, very easy to use, and I'm looking forward to your feedback when you try out TinyMCE's CRM configuration. Thank you so much for hanging around. Hope you have a wonderful day.